the scientist is curious. And the curious person has a lot of questions, naturally, right? But I find that there's another step, which is wonder. Because it's fine to be curious, it's good to be curious. And on some level, as a curious person, we're looking for a binary answer. Is that true? That's what a curious person might say. Is this real? Is that a good movie? How far is, can you take me to the store? Yes, or there's yes or no questions, right? And yet a wanderer only has one question. So let's say that the scientist is the curious person, the mystic is a wanderer. And wonder only has one question. I wonder what's going to happen. And then there's no outcome intent. If I can just be in wonder, I wonder how this is going to go. I wonder if this is going to be a good book. I wonder what I'm going to do next. I wonder how Scott's going to show his presence to me next. Because it's not saying it has to be this way and it doesn't have to be a binary. So the mystic is a wanderer. And the soul has one state, which is awe.
Wow.
And awe has no questions. Like if you stand at the edge of the Grand Canyon or Niagara Falls, you don't really have a question. You stand there in awe of the spectacle of it, of the beauty of it. In that moment, it's just a matter of taking it in. And
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the channel within. I am Mira, and I am excited to be speaking with Cheryl Page today. She will share with us her incredible journey of loss, and then as she has come to know an unshakable knowing that connection and consciousness exists beyond death. Hi, Cheryl, and welcome. Thank you for being here with me
oh
today.
my goodness, thank you so much for the invitation. You're very gracious to have me.
So, Cheryl, why don't you give us a little bit of background with your scientific left brain mind over there and your transition into the not so scientific area
Yeah,
of life?
right. So I was raised a normal child. I was raised Catholic, and I, you grow up and you get busy and you find a career and you get married and you have kids and life gets busy. And especially during that sort of period of time, let's say from 25 to 50, you're really busy, maybe 25 to 60. And my career was in palliative care, hospice, and oncology clinical research. So the the house that I dwelled in, Monday through Friday for 22 years was in sort of a what I'd call a left brain rigorous sort of scientific framework, right? And that was the acceptable language within academic medicine. And all was well and right with the world. I was a single mom working full time and a couple of kids in high school, and my beloved was crossing a highway and just to catch the bus and was hit by a car and passed away. And that, I mean, I work with death and dying, right? I work with people preparing to pass away. So I'm comfortable in that space. You and I had talked before we started today about you having the blessing of being with each of your parents when they passed. I was with my mom when she passed. I've been with many, many patients when they've passed. But I never lost the person I was in love with. And that was a tsunami of grief that I didn't even know could possibly exist. And so the question that I found after you sort of deal with all the logistics that have to be dealt with, the question was, how is it possible that this force of nature could just be extinguished? And so I started asking questions, probably way too left brain approach to a very right brained activity, but asking questions about this idea that I'd read somewhere about continuity of consciousness. And does our consciousness survive the death of our physical body? And if so, how is that possible? And what I found was I was somewhat paralyzed by this Newtonian binary that I was conditioned to in my work environment of it's either true or it's false. And so there was no middle ground. It's kind of like when you're sitting on an airplane between a really fat guy over here and a really fat guy over here, and you can't even move because you're paralyzed in true or false. And I realized very quickly that I needed a third option in order to stay open and at least make room for new information, even if they're hypothetical. Can I make room for new information to come in? So I found the phrase that gave me the ability to stay more open, and that was what if? What if I'm crazy? What if I'm not? What if I'm losing my mind? What if I'm not? What if Scott's here? What if he's not? But what if he is and I was ignoring him? So what if allowed me to entertain ideas that I'd never entertained before? And here's the truth. If Scott was gone, then I was going to face up to the fact that he was gone. But if he wasn't gone, I didn't want to, if there was the possibility that he wasn't gone, I didn't want to feel better because I was making things up in my head. If something is real, then to me it should be at least, we should be able to hypothesize about it, if not prove it. And so I was being very analytical I didn't want just a whole big spoonful of woo and call it good. I wasn't that desperate. I'm way too rigorous in my own heart to, just believe in a fairy tale. I wanted to know if this is real, then somebody should be able to explain to me how it might be real. And so that was my pursuit, and that's the backstory that brought me from 9 years ago almost all the way to here.
I really love that. I love the possibility, the dwelling of residing in that what if possibility, because it it shows like a humility and just um, opening up to possibility instead of the rigid true false. So thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
So how did you so lead us through this communication with Scott? And I am so sorry for that loss because I know that tsunami that you are talking about
Yeah,
too
yeah.
well.
Right. Um, it started with I didn't know anyone at the time of his passing. I didn't know anybody who knew anybody who knew anybody who knew a medium. That wasn't the sort of world that I was swimming in, right? And yet, a friend introduced me to the work of medium Suzanne Giesemann. And by a beautiful set of coincidences, somebody might say coincidences, but coincidences, I managed, even though her waiting list was 2 years long, I managed to get a reading in a month. And so I had this reading with Suzanne, and I did all kinds of acrobatics to make sure she couldn't Google me or whatever. And she came up in that reading with where he died and how he died and that he used to live in France and, all of these things that even if she could have Googled him, she wouldn't have found those things, right? So I was convinced, okay, you connected with him. All of your books say that this is a learnable skill. How do I learn? And she said, meditation. And I thought, oh, impossible, impossible. And she said, no, 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 think about it differently. She said, prayer is asking and thanking, and meditation is listening. So all you're doing is getting quiet and listening for him. And so if you think about this, and this is what I lived my way into an understanding of, is that I can think a thought, but spirit can push a thought into my conscious awareness as well. You and I have both heard those stories of the guy driving down the dusty, rainy road, and he's supposed to turn left and go over the bridge, and something says, go right. And he goes right because if he'd gone left, he would have driven into the river, right? So we know that there are ways that spirit, if we just say that's anecdotal evidence, from time immemorial, we've heard stories of hearing a voice that saves us from a catastrophe, let's say. And so somehow her saying that meditation is listening, that's amazing, because I can listen. I can't sit in a lotus position and, you know, still my thoughts. But here's the beautiful thing, and if this is helpful to your listeners, if you are a meditator, if you want to learn to meditate, and you want to sit in bliss beside higher consciousness and think no thoughts, that's not how you're going to connect with spirit. That's another kind of meditation. So you as a math person will love this. So my mathematics of this is A plus B equals C. A is the non-variable, that's meditation, that's the activity. B is your intention in regards to A. That drives C, the outcome. So if
Nice.
my intention is to connect with spirit with A, the activity, then I'm listening. And here's the thing to understand is that the only way that spirit has to communicate, because how many, we all have, as we go into this world of mediumship and spirit communication and all of that, what's the number one thing people struggle with? I just made it up in my head.
Yes.
The number one thing people struggle with is I just made it up. So if you made it up, that means that's your imagination, right? And the thing to understand, though, is imagination is to intuition as talking is to singing. So we've been misled about our imagination being only make-believe, as opposed to maybe the imagination is a tool that has a number of different settings, the imaginary and the imaginal. Because here's the thing, if spirit doesn't have a voice box anymore, then the only pathway through to your awareness is through the tool of your imagination. So as I'm sitting there listening for Scott, so I don't call it meditation, I call it listening practice. So as I'm sitting there in my listening practice, I'm listening for him. And so it's very different. And this hopefully will help someone, that if your intention is to just sit in bliss beside higher consciousness, then you want to still your thoughts. But that's not the only form of meditation. Listening for spirit is definitely a different intention. And so I don't want to still my thoughts. What I want to do is over time learn the difference between a thought that I had and a thought that was given to me. And that is a learnable skill. It's just like becoming a good listener. Becoming a good listener is a learnable skill. You're just learning to become a good listener to spirit. So,
Firstly, what a beautiful way to describe imagination in terms of how do you discern which one is yours and which one is spirit or our loved one speaking to us?
it's a really good question. And what I can say in this, I'll give you the simple version first and then I'll elaborate. But the simple explanation is, what I can tell you from my lived experience is that over time, if you're regularly listening, you will begin to tell the difference between your thoughts and thoughts that are given to you. And one, not foolproof, but one way to sort of determine was that me or was that spirit, is if you've just had a thought that you would never have in your whole life, right? Like, wait a minute, I would not be thinking of, whatever that thing is. And if you think about it, if we take your mom or Scott, excuse me, they are learning this new language with you. Because it's not,
Yes.
okay, if I move to France, they speak French. And if I move to, Latvia, they speak Latvian. But the spirit world isn't one language. It's your mother will develop a language with you, and Scott will develop a language with me, and my mother will develop a different language with me. So you're building this vibrationship together, and that language is unique to you. And so they're going to say, okay, they're going to whisper something to you, and then you don't get it. They go, okay, that didn't work. Let me try whispering something else. And then you get it. Then they go, okay, let's try more of that. But it's a process of experiment on both sides of the veil as you work to develop your own language.
I really love that. Can you tell us the origin of the word vibrationship?
Yep. So once I learned to listen, and I was in meditation one day, I said to Scott, okay, when you were here, we had a relationship. Now you're here all the time. What is this? What do we have? And he says, we have a vibrationship. And I got really excited because I'd never heard the word before. And I said, okay, what does it mean? Because he knows I'm the girl who needs the definition. Without missing a beat, he said, meaningful connectivity between two people on different vibrational octaves. And here's the challenge, friend. You know how people, and I don't think this is necessarily wrong, I think it's partial. Sometimes people will say, okay, I need to raise my frequency and spirit needs to lower their frequency and we meet in the middle. You hear that all the time, right? But if you look at a keyboard and you have low C, middle C, and high C, you're not going up to get to high C and you're not going down to get to low C. It's an expansion more than an elevation.
Wow.
So
Yes.
but things get bandied about and sort of carried through the lineage of the spiritual community. And so partial information is relayed as partial information is relayed as partial information. But once in a while, spirit gets through to somebody who says, okay, here's another possibility. Because people will sometimes say, well, if you're in deep grief, you're never going to be able to connect across the veil. That is not my lived experience. It's that you can be in grief and still be aware of some bad guy sneaking up behind you. You know, you
Sure.
still have your spherical awareness. So I think that might be helpful to people to understand it's not, okay, I have to finish doing this, being in deep grief, and then I can go to this. That was the way that I was taught, and it wasn't really how it played out for me. So you think about the journey. I'm just going to use the term heaven to imply the or nirvana, but like heaven, the place we go to, isn't real estate above a cloud somewhere. It's right here. It's just a different octave, like low C, middle C, high C. You know, high C isn't in heaven, and low C is in hell, and middle C is on the 3D plane. They all share a spectrum of awareness, and one might be a higher pitch and frequency than the lower one, but it's all right here. And so we don't have to finish one thing to do. We women are the queens of multitasking, right? We can be in grief and we can still communicate across the veil. So,
So, how do we get tuned into the vibrational field of heaven or the high octave C?
well, I think that it really matters, this idea of the M word, meditation, but listening practice. And what, just for clarification, when I'm in my listening practice, I use binaural beat technology. And so people can
Mm.
look that up. HemiSync, I think, is the most reputable company to, if you're going to download a binaural beat recording. But if you think about in a simple sense, the binaural beat technology is helping the hemispheres of your brain to hold hands. And it's one of those things. It's like, okay, I want to hear from Scott. The operative word is here. If I want to hear something, what do I have to do? I have to listen. So it's the starting point. But here's the thing. Okay, now I'm okay, I'm going to listen, Cheryl, but you don't know what you're listening for, you know? And so at one point in meditation, and Scott said it's active listening. And I said, well, what does active listening mean? And he said, if you're home alone at night and you're sound asleep in bed and you hear a sound at the front door, you sit up and you actively listen because you're looking, is it a murderer? Is my son coming home late? You are very attentive on what's going on in the field around you. So it is a learned skill, but just to simplify it for folks, when I started my listening practice and I didn't know what I was listening for, what I do is I fill, if you imagine um, love, joy, gratitude, elevated emotions have more bandwidth, like expansion versus contraction, right? So if I am a radio and I want to put out a big signal so that I can get FM stations, not just AM stations, I have to have more bandwidth, frequency modulation, right, versus amplitude modulation. And I'm expanding my awareness and I'm trying to increase that bandwidth through elevated emotions. Now you say, well, okay, I'm in deep grief. How do I feel joy? Here's my little exercise. Imagine you're sitting in a chair and you hear a knock at the door, knock, knock, knock. And you go and you open the door and there's your loved one. In that moment, you are not thinking about how much you love them. You're in joy because they're there. You thought they were gone and they're there at the door. So I can do that exercise and I can feel the joy that I would feel if Scott was at the door. So that at least gets me into a place, even if I'm in grief, it gets me into the place, even if I'm using my imagination, I'm using the tool of my imagination to facilitate an elevated emotion. What is an emotion? It's energy in motion, right? I'm just creating that motion of an expanded field of awareness. And then the number one thing, if I could give you one word and we were all done, the most important thing for communicating across the veil is asking.
Mm.
You have to invite. And I have people say to me all the time, well, I used to get signs and now I don't get signs anymore. The number one thing I say is, do you still ask? Because this idea of free will or free agency isn't a religious construct. It's a universal one. And spirit has to honor the boundary. It's like if my next door neighbor comes across the street, she knocks. It's polite. She doesn't just open the door and come in. And spirit doesn't generally just open the door and come in, but the invitation greases the skids, if that makes sense. It makes it easier for them to transport whatever distance there is, because I have said, yes, I want you to come near. What I say every morning, I kiss Scout's picture every single day for the last 8, almost 9 years. And I say, show me your presence in wondrous ways.
I love that.
There's the invitation. Every single day, show me your presence in wondrous ways. Let's have fun.
I had heard you speak before about it's like an analogy of getting a phone call, but you're just watching your phone and not
Yes.
answering. And I really love that. And that really spoke to me.
That's really important to understand, that we spend all this time asking for signs,
Yes.
and then you get the sign and you go, yay, I got another sign. Send me another one. As opposed to if I have my phone and my friend Mira calls, I don't go, yay, she called, and then I never pick up the phone. I answer and I say, hey, what's going on? What do you got? What are we gonna, what do you want to talk about today? So when you get the deer or the cardinal or the rainbow or the butterfly or whatever, I like to say that the signs are their new caller ID.
Mm.
And we get a choice. I can't pick up every call that I get. And when spirit calls, we can't always answer the phone, but they're not sending you another butterfly just to let you know that they're around. They're calling because they want to engage. They want to build this vibrationship with you. And it takes more than one to do that. Just like if you're married or your children or your parents, we have relationships with people, and relationships involve more than one person. Both people have to do their part.
So do you ask what are you trying to tell me and then do the active listening to get feedback?
Yeah, so it's a fun, it's a great question. And keeping in mind that spirit can push a thought into your conscious awareness, right? So sometimes it's, what do you have for me today? And then I listen and see if something pops into my head. But maybe what pops into my head is, open that book to a random page. Ask a question, open the book to a random page. I'm going to go on Facebook, I'm going to scroll, and the first thing I see, that's going to be my sign. But then here's when I started listening for Scott, and I didn't speak spiritual Latvian, I didn't speak the language that he's speaking. If you think about it, how do you talk to a kindergartner? You don't talk to them like your friend who's a PhD. It's a very different, you simplify it down to where it can make sense at the level of consciousness of that person, right? So Scott is giving me what feels like shopping lists because that was my level of capacity at that point. So one day, show me your presence in wondrous ways. And I'm walking by the bookshelf, and one of the books was sticking out in a funny way, and so I just went to push it back in so they were all flush. And Scott's picture's on top, and I have a thought. Is it my thought or a thought given to me? And I just hear that book that's sticking out, open it to a random page. So I close my eyes, fill my heart up with joy, like imagine what that would feel like if he was here. And I say, Scott, do you have a message for me today? And then I have my eyes closed, and knowing that he can tell me when to stop, like if I'm fanning the pages, he can tell me when to stop. He can push that thought into my awareness. So I say, Scott, do you have a message for me today? I fan the page, I open it up, and I kid you not, on the page, what I was looking at was, yes, I do. What's possible is so much more than we've ever imagined.
Absolutely. Can you share another beautiful story with Scott, and then we could move on to your other famous drop-ins, if you will?
Well, like I said, in my lived experience, and I always like to put that caveat in, someone with a different lived experience will tell you a different story. But in my lived experience, if I look at what has happened over the last 9 years, things that I couldn't possibly have imagined prior to July of 2017 happen. And so it's one of those things where I swear if we stay open and we have the what if that's him, what if it's not? But what if it is and I don't say thank you? So I regularly say thank you, and I basically just decide to give him the benefit of the doubt that he's trying, or my mom's trying, or my brother's trying, or whatever. And so one day I'm driving into the town where he lived, and I have this old car, and sometimes the radio is a little bit snarky, but anyway, I'm talking to him as though he's there, because what if he is? And I said, Scott, we didn't have a song. I want to have a song. I wish we had a song. And so I hear turn on the radio. So I push the button for the radio, and it's on a radio station. And the song that's playing, it had just started, and it was so perfect to our story. It was like whoever wrote the song was writing this song about us. It was incredible. And at the end of the song, the DJ comes on, and he says, "Hey, this is Scott. I hope you like that new song from Andy Grammer."
Wow.
But the amazing thing is that DJ's name, his first name isn't Scott. His last name is Scott. So the radio or Scott had the ability to bzz. So his first name disappeared, and all we got was Scott, and then the name of the song. So how is that possible? I don't have to understand, but I can tell you that if I stay open and allow him to delight and surprise me without saying, send me another cardinal, but just to say, it's not that it's wrong to ask for their caller ID, especially when we're learning, but to stay open to all the different ways that they might be able to delight and surprise you. Like one day I thought I'm going to put him to the test. So I said, okay, I knew he was never going to be able to pull this one off. I said, okay, how about today if you send me a pink alligator? I'm thinking there's no freaking way he's sending me a pink alligator. So anyway, I go to work. I was in my morning meditation. Pink alligator, that's my request for today. And I go off to work. And my boss sends me on an errand to a part of town I haven't been in before. And I'm a little bit confused and lost. I'm supposed to turn left, but I accidentally turn right. And I have to turn into a shopping center to turn around and come back out and go the right direction. And as I pull into the shopping center, I drive up to a new candy store called the Pink Alligator.
Oh, no, you can't make that up. You know
No,
what I
come
mean?
on. Come on.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is because you're allowing, like you said, that possibility and in not limiting it to just like the cardinal.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I am going to practice this.
So let's say I asked for the pink alligator and I didn't get it. Or here's the thing, there's a very key distinction. I didn't get it or I didn't notice it.
Mm,
So I invariably, my choice is to give him the benefit of the doubt that he's trying. And if I still remember the pink alligator at the end of the day, I would say, okay, I'm sure you tried. I'm sure I missed it. Let's try again. And I'd pick something else. Because it is a back and forth. But don't automatically assume this doesn't work because you didn't see the thing. Because I think they're constantly throwing things in front of us to see. And we're so sort of focused on our life that we don't always see. I would see something you wouldn't see. You would see something that I didn't see. But if I'm in vibrationship with him, then I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt that he's trying, and I continue to play the game. I don't take my ball and go home.
that's really beautiful. And that's a really good point to me because also sometimes we just have stuff going on and yeah, let's keep it open so that the communication is, it doesn't stop for
Yeah.
those who want that. So yes, great reminder.
Well, and this idea of coincidence. If you look at that word, it's the word coincide. And so to me, it's where we coincide with spirit. But to me, there's three proper responses if you think you got a sign from spirit. The first one is thank you. And the more enthusiastic, the better. That's the best. Because thank you is also elevated, right? The second is, Scott, is that you? Because if you ask the question, you entertain you're entertaining the possibility, right? And the third one, which is the spiritual equivalent of slamming the door in their face, is to say, oh, that's just a coincidence, as opposed to a coincidence with you and your loved one. And especially when I didn't know what the heck I was doing, I didn't feel like I had the luxury to be so discerning. I'm just going to give you the benefit until I can figure this out. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. Because here's the thing, we think about skepticism. Skepticism doesn't hurt spirit, it hurts you. Because true skepticism isn't what we think it is. The origin of the word is more about being open to more information, and the original skeptic was an inquirer, a looker, a careful examiner, but not our sort of modern use of that word is sort of harumph, right? And I don't think that true skepticism is different than our modern definition, and it's not the enemy of mystical work. True skepticism is part of our mystical maturity. We don't have to be gullible, but cynicism is the worst. This is crap. You just write it off as nothing. Nothing could possibly come through spirit. As opposed to gullibility, everything can come through spirit. As opposed to spirit, the spiritually mature thing to say is something's arising. Let me stay with it. Let me examine it. Let me notice the texture of it, the timing, the resonance. Is it useful? How does it make me feel? That's discerned participation. And, here's what I like to say is that if I don't have to get on the evening news and prove it to anybody else, I'm just going to take the ride.
I
I
love
can say,
that.
yay, Scott, yay! because I don't have to call anybody and say, okay, this is what happened and this is real. I can afford the luxury of giving him the benefit of the doubt. So I think we have, uh, we open ourselves to much more possibility if we can stay out of cynicism and gullibility, and be discerning is probably a more accurate, reflective uh, definition of the ancient meaning of skepticism, is to just be discerning. And if it makes you feel good, then who freaking cares?
Absolutely. I love how you explain how you moved from, or you made the transition of not only tuning into Scott, but to other forms of consciousness or
Yep.
other. So, if you could explain that and talk about one or two impactful ones
Yeah.
that.
So, again, when I started listening for Scott, I wasn't listening for my mom or my brother or my grandparents. I was listening for Scott. Everybody else, stay away. I'm only focused on listening to Scott. And he was giving me information, and I realized I was sort of in this spiritual apprenticeship. He was giving me things that I didn't know. And then what I would do if I got something and, okay, I don't know what this is. I'm a researcher. What do researchers do? We research things. So if I got the thing, if I got the king cobra or the strawberry tart, is that just a thought that I had because I'd love to have a strawberry tart? Or is that him giving me the kindergartner, something I can wrap my head around? And so I would go and say, okay, come with me. Guide me to the message you want me to find. And then I would put in strawberry tart, king cobra, spiritual meaning. I would look up the spiritual meaning of all these things because I didn't know what to do with the shopping lists of words I was getting. But I was getting these shopping lists of single words or phrases because that was my full capacity at that time. So in the listening practice, he was giving me all these different things. And I started meditating on the 7th of November, 2017. And this would have been the week before Christmas, 2017. And I am sitting in meditation. I've got my binaural beat technology headphones on. And clear as day, I hear a name, Christopher Tassel, 1954 airplane. Now, the temptation that you need to resist is, I just made that up. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't, but if you can resist the temptation, then you're not cutting off the stream of information. You can determine later if you're making it up or not. But I get this guy's name, and I get 1954, and I get airplane. And I don't know anything about anything, but I don't have to prove it on the news. So I finish my meditation, and in meditation, I feel like I'm the court reporter. The court reporter's job is not to think. The court reporter's job is to dictate, to write down every single thing that's said, right? So I'm taking dictation, and I'm not thinking about, what does that mean? And I've never heard of that before. No, shh. Just keep taking dictation, right? So then I get done with my meditation, and now I've got this guy's name, and I've got 1954 airplane. And again, I'm so early in my journey, I don't know if I'm making it up or not. And I swear there's some kind of spiritual anesthesia where spirit just anesthetizes you enough to have you not freak out, right? Just stay with it, just stay with it. So I know that Scott is not in my ceiling, but that day I've got Scott, I've got my friend John, who I'm both familiar with them coming through. And then I've got this other guy, Chris. And I'm thinking, I don't know who that is. And I hear in my mind's ear Scott saying, it's Christmas. You got to call his family. You got to tell him he's still right here and he loves them. I said, you're on crack. I'm totally not doing that. They're going to think I want something. No, I'm not doing that. I'm going to bed. So I go to bed and I wake up the next morning. I'm doing my morning meditation, and there's Scott and John, and there now I got this other guy in my ceiling, Chris. And the feeling was like, you got to call his family. You got to call his family. And I'm thinking, I'm so not doing that. And I had this book that had just come in the mail, And it was sitting on the bed in front of my meditation chair. And I said, okay, here's the deal. And I'm having this conversation with what anybody else would say was no one. But anyway, I said, okay. Uh, I had, before I had gone to bed that night, I had looked up this Christopher guy. And it turns out he lived in the East Coast. He was born in 1954. But then I couldn't figure out the airplane. And then I found that his son was a jet airline pilot. So I said, okay, I'm going to pick up this book. I'm going to open it to a random page. And whatever my eyes land on, no like searching the page for meaning, whatever my eyes land on has to be a sign, or I'm not doing it. Now, keep in mind, when Scott shows up in my meditation, at that point, I saw these sort of sparklers of blue. John was sparklers of purple, and Chris was now sparklers of yellow. Now, if I close my eyes right now, I don't see any sparklers of color, but I would see blue with Scott. So I said, okay, is that the deal? If you guys give me a clear sign, I will call his family. I pick up the book, fill up my heart with love and joy, and I fan the page, and I open my eyes and I look at the page, and what I see is JetBlue Airlines. Like, okay, I guess I'm calling his family. So I go back to the website where I know the son works, and I called the number figuring I could leave him a voicemail. First, I wanted to just send an email, but there was no email except like service. So I call the number and I get an automated voice. Thank you for calling so-and-so Jet Charters. For in repairs, press 1. For customer service, press 2. And for, Christopher Jr., press 3. And I thought, great, I'll leave him a voicemail. So I press 3 and he picks up the phone. So I'm looking at the ceiling going, you better help me with this. So I put on my least crazy researcher voice and I say, hello, my name is Cheryl. I'm calling from Colorado. And I was wanting to send you an email, but I couldn't find your email address on the website. I was wondering if you'd share it with me, and I promise I'm not a crazy person. And he laughs and says, of course. And he gives me the email. And I said, great, thank you so much. And I'm trying to hang up. And he goes, do you mind if I ask what it's in regards to? I said, well, I only fibbed a little bit. I said, it's in regards to your dad, and I think we might have a friend in common. But I'd feel better if I could just write it in the email. You don't need to reach out to me. I just am compelled to share with you the information. And you know how guys are. Sure, okay, great. So he hangs up. I write the email, and me and Scott and meditation and listening and Christopher 1954 airplane. And I finish that. I hit send, include a picture of Scott and me, and I go to work. About 2 hours later, the phone rings, and there's a woman, and she's crying. And this is the sister of the brother that I talked to, or the son, her brother. So the daughter of the guy in my ceiling, and she's crying, and she's the one who said, every year since my dad passed, he shows up at Christmas time to let us know that he's still around. And this year you're the messenger.
Yeah.
And all of that came from my listening practice. I'd only been listening for 6 weeks or something, but I trusted what came through, and I trusted whatever this dialogue was with Scott and John and Chris in my ceiling, and going where it leads me. I'm not really the person who's going to accost somebody, but if thankfully in that situation it worked out very well. And Scott, over time, very tenderly, but because I was always listening for him, I didn't want to talk to anybody else. And at some point, about a year into my listening practice, he said, I'm not going anywhere, but there are other people here who want to work with you, and you need to make space for that. And so then he's bringing in all of these different people to have these conversations. And again, I feel like it was a spiritual apprenticeship, and I was just getting the education because I was willing to be a student.
Yeah, I like how you explained that in opening up to consciousness and spirit, and Scott first, that it allows you to connect with anyone or any consciousness on the other side who's willing to also participate with us. So that was another aha moment for me.
Yeah.
And it totally resonates and makes sense. So thanks to that, Cheryl.
Oh my goodness. Well, and here's the thing. Like, let's say you called me and you wanted me to do a reading for you with your dad. Let's just say. If I can reach out to your dad, or if another medium could reach out and talk to Scott or my mom or my brother or my grandmother, whatever, we should be able to then extrapolate this plus this equals that. If I can talk to your father and I didn't know your father, then what is to preclude me from speaking to John F. Kennedy or Nelson Mandela or Amelia Earhart? There is
Exactly.
no gatekeeper on the other side. There's gatekeepers here. I'm not going to be able to call Justin Bieber, but I can certainly call Amelia Earhart. And again, if I don't have to prove it to anyone else and I can just take the ride, if nothing else, if I cannot definitively say that Amelia Earhart gave me a message, but it still enhanced my understanding and is it helpful, is it hopeful, is it healing? Yes. Then I don't have to prove it to anybody else. I can take those experiences. And I said to someone the other day, because there are people like Daryl Anka channels Bashar, right?
Mhm.
And Suzanne Giesemann channels Sanaya, and Esther Hicks channels her husband. Why is it more believable that someone sitting in a chair is channeling somebody else, but it's not believable that in my meditation I meet some guy called Chris from the East Coast? Like, why is one believable and one other unbelievable? It's just maybe we haven't been exposed to that potential. But if this is kind of like if you have a car in your driveway, right? And you can get in that car and you can drive to the store. If I've never driven a car before, but I see you, let's say I live across the street from you. If I see you get into your car and go someplace and come back with groceries, I should reasonably be able to extrapolate that I too could have a car and I too could drive to the store. It's logical. And I think what's the thing where it's if you hear hooves, it's most likely horses, not zebras. There's a term for that where the most obvious thing, can't
I
think of
it's
it.
like
You know
skipping
what
me
I
right
mean?
now too. Yeah, I do. I do. I'm sure it'll come after we
Yeah,
sign off.
exactly. Yeah, so the obvious answer is probably the one, and yet we make it, well, somebody else can do that, but I can't do that. Here's the other thing that I really struggle with is someone might say, well, you have to be a born medium. You don't have to be a medium at all. That's the point of this new book that I wrote, Vibrationship, is I'm trying to, it's not that you can't become a medium because it's like we're either all mediums or none of us are mediums. You can't say some of us are and some of us aren't. You could learn to play the piano, I could learn to play the piano, everybody who has fingers could learn to play the piano. Now, some people better than others, but it exists as a potential for all of us. But I think that there's an old model which says in order to communicate across the veil, you have to become a medium. I push against that completely. It's like saying, okay, if you're going to drive that car, you need to become an auto mechanic.
I
Or
love that.
I need to be a phone repairman in order to make a phone call, or I need to be a plumber in order to use my sink. No, it might be helpful, but it's not necessary. That's why I've really moved away from the use of mediumship into the term cross veil communication. Because I can make the phone call even though I don't know how to fix my phone. And I can drive my car even though I'm not an auto mechanic. So you don't have to be a medium. Rest assured, I am living proof that this is a learnable skill. And I learned it in my 50s, not when I was 2 seeing spirits move across my bedroom, because that wasn't me. But I think that there are these partial truths or other people's experiences that get translated as this is a blanket truth, which isn't necessarily so.
Again, beautifully explained, Cheryl. What feels most important to share that we haven't discussed already, Cheryl?
I think that we covered the key pieces of this about not becoming a medium and about um, asking as important. I think we've covered a lot of the key points. Do you have any other questions that are on your list that?
I liked when you talked about curiosity and wonder and awe. Can
Yeah.
you talk about that a little bit?
And you and I, raised in the Western world as a little child, we were always praised for being curious. Oh, she's such a curious child. I was always the curious child. And so if we now grow up and I'm curious, the scientist is curious. And the curious person has a lot of questions, naturally, right? But I find that there's another step, which is wonder. Because it's fine to be curious, it's good to be curious. And on some level, as a curious person, we're looking for a binary answer. Is that true? That's what a curious person might say. Is this real? Is that a good movie? How far is, can you take me to the store? Yes, or there's yes or no questions, right? And yet a wanderer only has one question. So let's say that the scientist is the curious person, the mystic is a wanderer. And wonder only has one question. I wonder what's going to happen. And then there's no outcome intent. If I can just be in wonder, I wonder how this is going to go. I wonder if this is going to be a good book. I wonder what I'm going to do next. I wonder how Scott's going to show his presence to me next. Because it's not saying it has to be this way and it doesn't have to be a binary. So the mystic is a wanderer. And the soul has one state, which is awe.
Wow.
And awe has no questions. Like if you stand at the edge of the Grand Canyon or Niagara Falls, you don't really have a question. You stand there in awe of the spectacle of it, of the beauty of it. In that moment, it's just a matter of taking it in. And, there's this wonderful guy. His name is Jason Silva. Everybody should watch this. It's just like 3 minutes. The title of the video short is We Have a Responsibility to Awe. And I think about that a lot. And I think that we move on a spectrum. Some days I'm curious, some days I'm a wanderer, and some days I'm in awe. But if I have a responsibility to awe, then to me, my translation for that is that as souls, not as 3D humans, but as souls, awe is our native territory. And then we slide down the scale and it's like, well, I wonder what's going to happen. I wonder if it's going to be inspire awe. And then we slide down the scale and why does it inspire awe, right? So and I think that it's perfectly normal that we go up and down that spectrum. But sometimes when I find myself being curious, I stop and say, could I get to wonder? Could I let go of my outcome intent and just see what happens? So,
Thank you so much for that. I have three questions I'd like to ask you. Quick ones. What brings you joy and laughter these days, Cheryl?
oh my God, Scott. And Scott and Spirit, so much every single day something happens that just delights and surprises me. And somebody asked me the other day, how you doing? And I said, if I was any better, there'd be two of me. And in July of 2017, that did not seem to be real as a possibility. So the progression and the possibility and the gifts of wonder that spirit can convey if we stay open are beyond our wildest imagination.
Thanks for that because I was curious about your progression from July 2017 to now, and you answered it there so beautifully.
Yeah.
What would you tell young Cheryl who's about to embark on this wonderful journey called life?
Oh my God, I would say be brave, don't be afraid, and ask bigger questions. You know, drink in. If you could run and grab the big cup of life and drink it in, I would tell her to be braver. I think my biggest fear in life is not being brave. And brave looks like different things at different times of our lives. It's brave, you got to be brave to get married. You got to be brave to become a parent. You got to be brave to be kind to people who are not being kind to you. There's all different ways that that courage might appear. But if I could reach back through time and give her some advice, it was say yes more. Be
I
brave and
like
say
that.
yes more.
And what final message or blessing do you have for those listening?
There's a quote by someone called C.W. Leadbeater, who was born mid 1800s, died 1920s, 1930s, something like that. And this quote is foundational to keep bringing me back to center. And I'm trying to say here, I'm going to look away because it's up on the wall in front of me.
Sure.
It is one of the commonest of mistakes to consider the limit of our power of perception is also the limit of all there is to perceive.
Wow.
But we do that, right? And then there's someone called Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. And Desjardins said, it is our duty to proceed as if limits to our abilities do not exist. We are co creators in creation.
Wow. So beautiful, Cheryl. For those wanting to connect with you, how can they do so?
My website is mysticrichness.com, which is the name of my first book and
Mhm.
also the name of my website. And you know how when you go to a website at the bottom it says contact us. So there's a little button where if you want to contact. And my Substack is if people want to be on a mailing list, because I forgot to tell you, Mira, I have this amazing team of people that work with me. They're called me, myself, and I. There is nobody else other than my friends in spirit, and they're not really great at answering emails. So if people want to be a part of my mailing list, it is free. You're going to get options: pay this, pay that. Just choose free. Um, and if you sign up for my Substack, you get my musings. And like when Mira's podcast comes out, I'm going to post it on my Substack. So it's the way to stay tapped in with what I've got going on. Just mysticrichness.substack.com.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much for being here with me today and having this remarkable conversation.